Hello and welcome to this feature report between WFUV's two New Jersey Devils beat reporters. I'm James Birle, joined by my colleague Chris Carrino, who I love getting to do some work with. It's been a little while since I've gotten the chance to do some work with you because, well, we've been kind of doing some tag team stuff with the New Jersey Devils this year. It's your first year covering the team as a beat reporter. It's my second year. So, Chris, first of all, how are you doing this halfway through the NHL season where All-Star Week has come upon us, and it's time to take a good look at the National Hockey League season, specifically with respect to the New Jersey Devils. So let me throw it over to you, man. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. I'm good. It was cool seeing the All-Star stuff. I feel like when you compare it to something like the Pro Bowl or something of that nature, I feel like the NHL does a really good job, and it was a good time. They're doing a good job getting celebrities involved as well. I thought the additions of Bublé and Bieber and McRae, especially McRae, were just fantastic. And I thought that they did a great job. And there's two Devils there as well, kind of representing for the squad. I think every team had at least one representative.
Yeah.
So that was cool to see as well. But yeah, I've had a good time. We're kind of at the halfway point. Seems like it's really snuck up on us. I feel like this first half has come very fast. And it's an interesting place where expectations may have been when this season started up until now. I think it's definitely changed a lot. Just from the Devil perspective. But from my perspective, the Devils are the second beat report I had. I covered a game for NYCFC over the summer, but this is the first time really being scheduled on a team. And the Prudential Center is a place I kind of grew up in, so I have a lot of nostalgia for that kind of place and kind of seeing it in a new light with the beat reporting and getting more and more comfortable each time I go. It's been an interesting ride. I'm happy my last game I got to actually see a win. The Devils were had a bit of a losing streak, as I know you've had a bit of a losing streak with them as well. But it was cool to see them get a win, and it's just been overall just a great experience, along with the other beat reports I'm on and the more experience I'm getting from women's basketball and things of that nature. The Devils are just one of the kind of vessels that I've been using to get my creativity off, if you could say, James. So,
Yeah, awesome, man. I'm super stoked for you personally, of course. And that's why I wanted to have you on to do this because, well, you've gotten a very good look at this team from a new perspective. Obviously, the Prudential Center meaning a lot to you, once the home of the New Jersey Nets. We remember those days very fondly, at least I
yeah,
do as a
yeah,
as a proud red-blooded New Jerseyan. But the,
me
the
as
fact
well.
remains that there's only one team in the state at this moment, and it is the New Jersey Devils. And I'm glad we talked a little bit about the All-Star break. It was fun to have Jesper Bratt and Jack Hughes there. And yes, the new format of the skills competition made things more interesting. I was also pleased to see that the scores of the games were actually low and pretty tight. We had a couple go to a shootout, so that
Yeah,
was very fun. But things in New Jersey at the moment, not so fun. As we look at
yeah,
the standings right now, they've played 47 games, so a little bit more than halfway through the year, but the All-Star break does give you a good time to take a deep breath and reset. 24 wins, 20 regulation losses, and three overtime losses. It's 51 points, tied for fifth in the Metropolitan Division, but as many as 7 points out of a second wild card spot with a few games in hand on the likes of the Detroit Red Wings. But that said, it's an uphill battle to climb. They've been without Jack Hughes. They've been without Dougie Hamilton. And they've been without Jonas Siegenthaler, amongst others. Goaltending hasn't been good. We've talked about all that to this point of the season, but I'm going to pedal things back a bit. We'll talk about that stuff again in a minute. But this was your first time getting to cover a beat long term, over the course of a season where you'd get scheduled games. And based on how things went last year with the Devils having a franchise record 112 points, franchise record 52 wins, and then beating the New York Rangers, who bolstered at the deadline in the first round of the playoffs, your biggest rival. I feel like there was a lot of good vibes coming into the season for New Jersey, as you would expect, a team that has been young and struggling for a while. Just seemed like they turned a corner into one of the elites of the NHL, and it hasn't gone that way this year. Would you say that your expectations, Chris, coming in were like mine and that you were really pumped to finally be covering a really good team long term? Because last year, when I was coming into the Devils beat, I didn't expect it and I was pleasantly surprised. This year, I've been unpleasantly surprised. Would you say the same?
yeah. I mean, I would say I'm unpleasantly surprised, but kind of looking back with hindsight, I shouldn't have had expectations maybe where they should have been. I think last year it really put the Devils on the map, and not even in a way of like a corny way when talking just the dimensions of the NHL, but more just from a culture standpoint. They're selling out the arena now. The fans are really invested. They have someone like Jack who is just they're able to really like have kids look up to and just be a face for the franchise, which they haven't had in a couple years. So I think just from a culture kind of standpoint, it was really big last year. And I think everyone was really amped up for this year. It hasn't gone how they wanted it to go. I remember I was in Prudential Center mid-December. They played the Ducks. It was when Henrique had the hat trick against the Devils. I remember watching that game thinking, and I watch a lot of Ranger hockey as well. Compared to the Rangers, like this is not a playoff team. Like it was just it kind of hit me, and I had seen them lose twice to the Capitals. That maybe should have been some sort of indicator. But then after watching that game, I was like, this is really not a playoff team, and they're nowhere near where they need to be a playoff team. And you kind of thought that that would eventually settle and they would kind of live back up to that potential, but just kind of continues to stay meddling all the way to the All-Star break. And that place of limbo is just somewhere that I'd be very afraid of as a Devil fan, especially with the expectations coming into the year from last year as well. They're just not in a it's an uncomfortable position for Devil fans right now.
Yeah, I think you make a fantastic point about the difference in feel in just the stadium alone and the culture around the team. Just a year ago, even when the team was playing really well in November and December, I remember a 13-game win streak that culminated in this massive, massive game right before Thanksgiving where they lost to the Maple Leafs, but they had three disallowed goals. And that crowd, I had never seen anything like that, at least in years at the Prudential Center. And that sort of vibe has carried over into this season because of that weight of expectations and that pressure now that's on the team. And in some ways, they haven't responded to it well. The Devils have one of the worst home records amongst teams in the NHL, which is really disappointing considering how good they were at home just a year ago. I want to talk a little bit about the defense, though, which has struggled. We're going to talk about the
Yeah.
goaltending. We've talked about it ad nauseum all season long. But with injuries to Dougie Hamilton and Jonas Siegenthaler, what those injuries have really pointed out is that the departures of guys like Ryan Graves and Damon Severson from a year ago, those two veteran blue liners, has made it difficult for this team to usher in the new age of defense in New Jersey. They have some of the best defensive prospects in the league with Luke Hughes coming in and Seaman Nemec coming in, and two great players who have had decent to good seasons so far, especially in Nemec's case, I would say. But then you have guys like Kevin Ball and John Marino who were established NHLers last year and for Marino several years have really had to step up and be top pairing defensemen in many times this season. And I think that maybe the Devils got a little bullish on their defensive prospects, or is this maybe more just like growing pains to get to that next era of players? Because as it's proven for Columbus, $6 million a year for David Severson, that's too much money. $4.5 million for Ryan Graves every year. That's too much money, and the Pittsburgh Penguins are paying it. The Devils have better contracts, but I think they may have to suffer through this, transitional period of new defensemen learning the trade of NHL defense and really getting up to that level. It's been sloppy in many moments. Like maybe it takes Luke Hughes getting walked by Wyatt Johnston against the Stars a couple weeks ago to really learn what it means to play at this level. I think that Lindy Ruff is a coach who really values having youth. And we're going to talk about Lindy Ruff and whether or not he's done a good job this year in a minute. But because of his philosophy, one that, Tom Fitzgerald wanted to hire him for in the first place, to be patient with youngsters and give them the ability to grow at their own pace in the right league. And it feels like Luke Hughes and Seaman Nemec are on the right path, but it may come at the expense of the Devils, losing some big games in 2023, 2024. I'm curious if you had the same interpretation of that, and if you think that, they made the right move last year, moving off of guys like Graves and Severson.
Well, I think we kind of gathered it almost immediately, at least in the first couple weeks, that the defense was in trouble and ooh, we might have made a mistake in the offseason just a little bit. And it's not even, I think you're right when you talk about both Severson and Graves getting overpaid. That's definitely true. But it's not even the absence of them necessarily. It's just an absence of attention on the defense. And I think an attention on the defense that wasn't paid in the offseason, it felt immediately that it was affecting the team. I mean, you looked at the final scores over weeks and it was 6 goals, 5 goals, 3 goals, 4 goals. Like they just no help whatsoever. And it just turned into, are we going to shoot out tonight? If we score 4 goals, we can maybe win. If not, probably going to be in trouble. And that's just as a hockey team, just not a place you want to be, and not a place where you can get anything really going and you can really create momentum. It's hard to create momentum. And I think that the defense of the Devils, you really felt it stick out like a sore thumb when they leave. They almost, it didn't really, you didn't feel it last year when they had this defense. You didn't feel a dominance over their defense or anything. You didn't feel that they were really winning the Devils games. I mean, I think in some aspects maybe, but not on the level it is now. But the absence makes the heart grow fonder is the term,
Mm.
and I feel that way about the Devils defense and maybe some of the pieces they had prior. And I was there for when Severson came back. It seemed like the New Jersey crowd loved him very much. Maybe could have held on to him. I mean, the money is definitely a problem, but if you could have somehow came to an agreeable number, I think that would have been a move to make. But the defense is really it's where the problems start and where they end for me. I mean, you mentioned goaltending just a little bit, but I don't think the attacks had some periods not playing their best, but it hasn't been the overarching problem. This defense and the goaltending is really where the problems start and finish here, and really why they are where they are. I think this team's a lot better than their record is in their placement in the conference and in the division. And I think that, like I've said five times already, it starts and ends with the defense and the goaltending. But the defense has been just more frustrating to me because it seems like you have less excuses on that front. And yeah, it's just been frustrating to watch.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. The offense has really not been something to write home about in terms of problems, even with injuries to some big players. The Devils have had efficient games. They were shut out once this year, which they weren't all of last year. But they're still seventh in the NHL. I'm looking at it right now in expected goals percentage, which means the advanced statistics say that this team at 5-on-5 is one of the top 10 in the NHL in terms of creating more chances at scoring than they give up per game. Now,
Yeah.
that
And we
said,
see it,
there
and James, we see it when we go. They'll have six golden opportunities in a period and they just won't score. It's a weird that metric and that stat doesn't surprise me. But also I don't think it's the full story because I just think this team
absolutely.
wastes so many golden opportunities constantly.
Yeah, and it's not that they're only wasting their opportunities, they're underperforming offensively and they're certainly underperforming defensively and in goal. So let's talk about the goaltending now. If I read out some stat lines of these goaltenders, you'd be surprised to know that Vitek Vanacek actually has a winning record on the season. He's got 16 wins and 8 losses, which,
Wow.
2 wins for every loss. It seems pretty good. But then
Yeah.
you read he's got an 886 save percentage and 3.24 goals allowed, goals against average, excuse me. That's the worst of among any starting goaltender in the NHL. That's the worst of any long-term NHLer at the moment. It was previously better than Ilya Samsonov, who's sort of had something of a resurgence before the All-Star break for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And what those two have in common is they were both splitting time together for the Washington Capitals just a few seasons ago. Since then, the Capitals have moved on from both of them and have sort of found a long-term goalie, perhaps in Charlie Lindgren. So maybe good business on behalf of the Washington Capitals and some not so good business and wishful thinking from Toronto and New Jersey. What Vitek Vanacek was able to do last year was, honestly, I think it still goes understated. 33 wins, and he's the first goaltender not named Marty Brodeur to hit more than 30 wins in a season in a Devils jersey. To me, it felt like the Devils found a long-term goaltender that even though he was not much better than league average, and if that, because he's certainly not there this year, they were going to be a good enough team in front of him to win games. And that's all you need sometimes. There's very few examples of it in the past, but not a lot of NHL teams necessarily need to have an elite goaltender to win long term. I mean, it certainly helps to have an elite goaltender, but the Vegas Golden Knights went through 3 goalies before they won the cup last year. They had Logan Thompson, he was injured. Laurent Brossoit, he was injured. And then Aiden Hill, their third string, steps in and they end up winning a Stanley Cup. So it doesn't have to be that the Devils had to get Connor Hellebuck over the season. But with hindsight as 2020, Vitek Vanacek has not been confident in that this year. Akira Schmid, who is supposed to be, known for his mentality, the youngster, has not been confident, and he's been struggling with the Utica Comets since going down to the AHL. Nico Dawes stepped up and looked good here and there, but the fact remains, I think that this team is not playing good enough hockey in front of these goaltenders to suffice having a league average goaltender be as good as he was. And I think maybe that's what made Vanacek look so good last year. While I'm still saying I wouldn't overstate how his contributions to the team in 2022-23. But as it stands now, goaltending, when you don't get saves, half chances turn into goals, medium chances turn into big chances, and small chances turn into medium chances. It just every mistake you make defensively when you don't have a confident goaltender just feels like 10 times bigger. And we've seen time and time again where the Devils, in the arena, they're giving up the first goal 80% of games this season. If they have a back-to-back, goaltenders are tired or the team is tired and just they get opened up defensively, they're 1-8-1 in the second half of 2 games per day. So they've not been dealing with the punch as well, and goaltending has been getting most of the shtick for it. And yeah, I mean, I can throw it over to you now, but I think you're just going to say more of what I've said is that the goaltending has been disappointing at best. And I'm curious if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I kind of thought you can kind of see shades of the problem in the playoffs, specifically in the early stages of that Ranger series. You can
Oh,
like
yeah.
there's some trouble here for sure. And so I'm not totally surprised with the goaltender trouble just because I saw that firsthand. And you can kind of it was even worse maybe a little bit in the playoffs because by comparison, that defense and that offense, the goaltending really looked like it was lacking. And I think this Devil team in general has just looked for other areas of their roster to compensate for others. And then you look behind them and they're all kind of compensating for each other and no one's really doing anything. And I think that's kind of been the story of the defense and the goaltending, both kind of thought to compensate for each other coming into the season and both kind of areas really depleted, especially at this point in the season. And I just feel that they're in trouble. That this I just don't know what the answer would be. When I look for solutions, it gets really bleak. And I think that's when you realize you have real problems when they're not just that solvable. And teams this good should have problems that are easy to solve and they should
Right.
not be that, it shouldn't be uh for a better term, it shouldn't be this difficult. It shouldn't be a maze.
Hmm.
It shouldn't be a mystery. And I just the solution is harder and harder to find, especially as we get deeper and deeper into this season. I just it just doesn't seem like this Devil team is going to be able to come up with any sort of solution that will really suffice the problem that is right now, and nothing that'll really get them over the edge into really where they want to be. Because it seems like their preseason expectations, if we were to fast forward them till now, they are just miles off the mark completely.
Absolutely. And the trade deadline is a month and 3 days away. It's March 8th. So if they're going to look to get a goaltender from elsewhere, that's a tricky to do in the middle of the season. You're trying to bring in an elite goaltender. It just doesn't really happen much. Even if in the offseason, blockbuster goalie trades are very rare in this league, and for good reason. They're so valuable to have. Um, and I think it's a tough question to even evaluate whether the Devils are buyers or sellers at this point, 7 points out of a playoff spot. Let's talk a little bit more contemporarily now within the last couple weeks. Jack Hughes was at the All-Star game, but he didn't play. He's been nursing an injury. He's been out for 15 games since early January. And um, in this actually in the same game that Connor Bedard was injured by Brendan Smith at the Prudential Center. Since then, though, he's been skating the past few days. He skated this morning in a non-contact jersey, as did Brendan Smith. And the Devils look to be welcoming some players back with Jack Hughes. The team is so much different. It's really much more likely that they, string some points together over some couple games and can make some ground on that second wild card or third place in the Metropolitan Division, which, is obviously their goal here. But there's been some discussions that Lindy Ruff might not be the best man to get them to that point. We've seen some firings across the NHL, including in teams in this division. Lane Lambert was fired by the Islanders, replaced by Patrick Waugh. Todd McClellan was just fired by the Kings, who currently hold a playoff position and are still favorited to go into the playoffs despite their awful skid recently. Lindy Ruff has been criticized a lot, specifically lately for his use of the forward lines with respect to Alexander Holtz, who leads the Devils in goals at 5-on-5, I believe, with 11 or 10. And that's very significant for a team that's supposed to be very efficient at 5-on-5, that this guy leads the team in goals at that metric. Yet he's still buried on the fourth line, playing 8-9 minutes a game. And when Lindy Ruff was asked about why he wasn't playing so much, he gets very defensive about him to reporters. But to me, it mirrors a lot of what he does with the younger players in the past. He did the same with Jesper Bratt. challenging him, playing him on the third line instead of the second or first, and forcing him to, become a more 200-foot player. And if you look at Jesper Bratt now, he's playing on the penalty kill a lot more. So I think that he's trying to challenge Alexander Holtz, but what it's done is it's maybe like similar to the defense sacrificing points this season for growth down the line, which may not be a great business model for a team that, for as young as they are, could win now and should win now. So I'm curious, how do you feel about Lindy Ruff and his decision to maybe prioritize the future for a guy like Alex Holton? Do you think that, he's on 23 points, 12 goals through 47 games, that is it really that detrimental to the team? And is Lindy Ruff doing more? Could he be doing more? Is he not getting enough out of this team? Giving up the first goal in a lot of games seems like a very correctable issue, and that would fall on the coach. But I can't say I can levy too much criticism on him for these things. But this is just his coaching style, and I think it hurts in the short term, but it may be beneficial in the long term.
Yeah, I think the Islander situation almost gives the Devils no excuse to really be complacent here. I think because I think that was even almost less warranted, to be honest with you. I
Really?
still was a bit shocked by that Islander situation just for how they were playing at the time and how they're playing now. Islanders in a way bit better position to really be good now than the Devils are. And maybe that's why they were so impatient with it, maybe because they realized they saw the opportunity in front of them. But for this Devil team, I've had the pleasure of going to Lindy press conferences after every game. A lot of those are losses, and he just seems frustrated when he walks in, downtrodden, maybe getting more impatient with every single reporter question, having to answer the same questions,
Yeah.
and just a level of distaste on his face that just grows as the press conference continues. And I just feel bad for him, honestly. I don't think he is to blame for a lot of these issues. I mean, let's not forget he was the coach last year too. And he did a fantastic job. I think, even he should have been in coach of the year conversations last year for sure. Like that was,
Yeah, and he was.
did he, who won the coach of the year last year, James?
The Jack Adams went to Bruce Cassidy
Okay.
of the um Bruins, but I don't think that
And that ended
that
up well
Lindy
for
Ruff
them.
finished far down low on that list.
That went well for them in Boston. But anyway, I just think Lindy shouldn't have the full blame here. I don't think this has been totally his fault, and I think kind of abandoning him here makes it so much worse because you're immediately just sinking the ship. You're immediately a team that isn't great. You're immediately jumping back, almost back into another rebuild. It seems silly to say that because of last year, but getting rid of Lindy Ruff, I mean, it's just it's a level of comfortability that just immediately goes away, and it's a team that can't afford to lose that level of comfortability to me. This team's had really tough stretches. You talked about Jack for a second there. That stretch without Nico and Jack, where they were both injured, I think that did almost unrepairable damage to the season, just on a
Mhm.
leadership level, and maybe these guys trusting their teammates. It did serious damage, and I think getting rid of Lindy would just be compounding the problem, and I think the last thing the Devils want to do right now is compound any sort of problem.
Right, and let's not forget that earlier this season his contract was extended by Tom Fitzgerald, and it's been made clear that the Devils are not necessarily not going to do business during the trade deadline season, which is I guess upon us now. It's 1 month really until the trade deadline. We've seen some big moves between the Winnipeg Jets and Vancouver Canucks at the top of the Western Conference. You're supposed to fortify your roster when you're at your strongest. It seems that that's what they're doing. I'm glad you mentioned the time where Nico Hischier was also out. The Devils' record with Nico in games versus without games is astounding. How much more they win with him than without him. And yeah, the fact that they lost both of them at the same time for one portion, even though Nico came back quicker, it is huge. Nico's almost a point per game player. Jack is more than a point per game player. Once that guy gets reintroduced to the squad, there's a chance that they can make a push for it. So let's take a look at the Metropolitan Division standings. As it stands right now, the Devils in tied for fifth with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who aren't a pushover either. Kind of forgotten about Pittsburgh since they missed the playoffs last year. They're still very much a team that could make the playoffs. Sidney Crosby's having a great year. Kenny Malkin and Chris Letang are, they're firing. Jake Gensel's firing. They've got a better goaltender situation for sure with Tristan Jarry. Um, and while I think Lindy Ruff has some work to be done with the Devils, there's definitely room for criticism as well. I think you're absolutely right. Moving on from him would compound the issues. And I want to correct myself. Jim Montgomery won the Jack Adams last year for the Boston Bruins. So let me correct that with Cassidy and Montgomery switching over year after year from Golden Knights to Bruins. Confused me for a little while, but now I've got it. The point being, though, is that there are two playoff teams holding the wild card in the Atlantic Division. The Maple Leafs and Red Wings both have 58 points. The Lightning have 59. So you expect them, with the extra games that they've played, to probably drop into the wild card position. The Flyers hold third in the Metropolitan on 56 points. It looks more likely for any team in the Metropolitan Division looking to make the playoffs to sneak in through that third spot in the division as opposed to the wild card in the Atlantic. And the Flyers, despite winning first 5 games of January, lost their last 5 going into the All-Star break and seemed to be like a team that could really struggle down the line, even though John Tortorella has done a fantastic job with that team right now. Without Carter Hart moving forward for reasons we obviously know why, the team's not going to have their goalie, and they've been struggling to this point. It looks like they're the most vulnerable playoff team left, and the Devils honestly do have a prayer now with Jack Hughes coming back.
And
Um,
James, would you ever say that this Flyer team is better? Like I don't think so. Like I don't think anyone would say that when you're just looking at these two rosters. I think that's just taking it out, kind of looking at it from a more just general perspective. I just don't see any way the Devils can be satisfied with the Flyers taking their playoff spot because I just think they're a better hockey team.
And I would say the same about the other teams that are currently above them in the Islanders and Penguins, who,
Yeah.
I'll give credit to the Flyers and Islanders who, don't have the top heavy talent that the Penguins and Devils have for playing better team systems through the season that have made them successful. I think John Tortorella's got cultivated a great attitude in Philly, one that really matches his coaching style and the style of Philadelphia sports, as well as a very aggressive neutral zone trap that has been very effective, especially when I saw the Devils and Flyers at the Prudential Center. I was very impressed with the way schematically the Flyers defended as a unit, and the Devils struggled to deal with that. However, that's the sort of story of the season. Teams have been able to figure out the Devils, whereas the Devils can't quite figure out other teams, but they can't figure out themselves. Is perhaps the hardest part. And that's made it more difficult when you have injuries to your entire top pairing of defense and your two top centers are out long term. And when Timo Meier is supposed to be a big goal scorer who's been playing through injuries for a long time as well. So I think that there's a lot of issues that aren't going their way. If we take a look at this coming week, though, the Devils do not have an easy go of it. They're going to be at home, but they're going to be facing the Colorado Avalanche, who are absolutely surging. They're a wagon, make no mistake about it. They've
Yeah.
got the Calgary Flames a couple days after, who are in the middle of selling off their team, and I guess the Devils maybe could start poaching at some of those defensemen, perhaps
Shout out
Noah
Tate
Hannafin and
McRae,
Chris
of course.
Tanev.
Tate McRae, the biggest star on that Calgary Flame roster, I think.
Right, absolutely, absolutely the biggest star. But then following that, they got the Hurricanes, Kraken, Predators, Kings, and then 3 divisional games in a row at around the end of February with the Flyers in that outdoor game, the Capitals, and then the Rangers. This is a huge, huge stretch of games for the Devils, not only because they could be welcoming back Jack Hughes, but because these are teams that they need to be getting points against. The Hurricanes, Flyers, Capitals, and Rangers all within the span of 2 weeks against each other. Those aren't just 2 point games; those are 4 point games each. Those are divisional teams you have to beat. And then they've got some tough Western Conference opponents in the Kings, Kraken, Predators, and Avalanche. So this is going to be a tough stretch for the Devils. It's been very very known that they have one of the toughest stretches of games down the line for the rest of the season. Do you think it'd be worth it for them to bolster this team at the deadline? They're going to have room to play with Dougie Hamilton on long-term injured reserve. They have almost $20 million. Should this team buy or sell? I go absolutely be a buyer. Even if you're getting rentals, this team is good enough to be a playoff team. Why would you ever think about selling? You have to be able to make a push for this playoffs, so this postseason. And if not, I still think that they could get it done with the roster of guys they have, but it doesn't look like they're going to do it without a boost. I think a guy like you mentioned him early on this broadcast. I think Adam Henrique is absolutely a guy the Devils could have in the
Ooh.
final year of his contract. Could bolster the forward core both defensively and offensively, especially with injuries to that center core. I think that the Devils would be in a great market to bring back one of the guys that they've called a legend in the past. But I think a lot of teams are going to be interested in him. He's a prototypical you know deadline deal with his current contract situation. Devils buyers or sellers in your opinion, Chris?
Think they have to be buyers. I think if you're sellers, the question almost arises, well, what are we doing this for? Like what's the main goal here? Like, what, we just gonna keep running in this hamster wheel? You have to be buyers at some point, at least to see it implode. Because if you see it
Right.
implode, you know that All right, let's just go back to the drawing board. Maybe we're sellers now, hit a little more rebuild, but there's no way you can get you got to get some sort of satisfaction out of some sort of result here, bad or not. And I think the Ranger game at the end of the month is definitely a measuring stick game for this team. I think Rangers ironically started the season very differently, but seem like they've kind of recently been in similar spots. The
Yeah.
Rangers really been struggling. So it's going to be a measuring stick game for both of those teams to kind of see where each are. And I think it'll be really important for both those teams. As you said, 4 point games, all those games in division. So important for this Devil team to kind of make ground. I think the Henrique shout out is really that's big. That's big time only because I think he has an aura that could really help this Devil team right now.
Absolutely.
He's played a few games in Prudential, at maybe the biggest moment in the history of that building, which is not an understatement. I think if you ask people, I think that goal against the Rangers can 100% maybe be the best moment in Prudential Center history. And also just when you're around reporters, when the Ducks are there, you could hear them. You go into Adams' press conference, you go into Henry's
Mhm.
press conference. Like you just there's a little buzz around him that I think could be really, really beneficial for this team. But besides that, in defense, I think you just gotta really try and go for it here. Even if rentals, like you said, just try and get guys that can be stable at least for a little bit, just to see how this team can play with a good defense behind them. Really see the full potential because I don't think the full potential has been seen yet because they've really been handicapped by their defense behind them. And yeah, I think just there's no reason to not make a final push right now. Whether it's successful or not, I think just a sense of finality on it is the most important thing for this Devil team right
Mhm.
now. And yeah, I think you're right. I think teams in front of them. I don't know about the Islanders. I think the Islanders. I think I may rate the Islanders a little bit higher than the normal person would, but teams like the Flyers and the Penguins and teams of that nature, no business being in front of the Devils. Even the Red Wings. I mean, the Red Wings have had a pretty crazy season, but
A great
another
start
team.
to the year.
Yeah, and just another team that I don't think, and with Patty Kane joining them as well, that's another dynamic that makes it interesting, but not a team I think has any right calling themselves better than the Devils. So I think making a final push, being buyers is the right thing to do. Obviously, you mentioned the situation overseas right now. And that whole thing is going on. Players getting detained and dynamics of teams changing pretty drastically, including the Devils themselves.
Yeah.
So everyone's just kind of playing with the waves right now, but I think the Devils really need to pick it up right now. This month, super important for them. And I think it says everything you'll need to know, not only about what this season has been, but what Devils hockey looks like in the future, the next 2 or 3 years. I think this month is one of the more pivotal times the Devils have had in this era so far, the last year or so.
Well, before we give our final predictions on the season and wrap this up, we have to address what's clearly going on in the NHL and not just the New Jersey Devils. It goes much wider than that with the whole Hockey Canada 2018 World Junior Team situation. In that four current NHL players and one former NHL player and Alex Formenton were uh, detained officially by London, Ontario police for the very, very well known, very well publicized issue that occurred in 2018 between the Canada hockey junior team and a woman who, for her benefit has not been revealed publicly. The whole sexual assault scandal there, and it now has come into a situation where two members of the New Jersey Devils were called to London, Ontario, and were forced to be detained by the police. Those two, Michael McLeod and Cal Foote. McLeod had been an important part of this New Jersey Devils team last year into this season and was continuing having really what for him was a career year. But with that situation going on, you obviously stand with the victim and her family and her situation and just hope that justice is found and that should everything that happened be true, you hope none of it is, of course, that Michael McLeod and Cal Foote never be welcomed back to the NHL along with the three other guys who were involved with this disgusting situation. But as it happens, that this is not the important part of that whole situation, but as it happens, it does leave an effect on the Devils in that they're going to be losing two players, one of which an established NHLer, the other one a taxi between the Utica Comets and Devils. And that means that there's a player to fill in that roster for New Jersey. They have depth in the center with Eric Hall, Dawson Mercer, guys who can play center, in addition to Heishier and Hughes. But that opens the door, I think, for a guy like Adam Henrique to come in, not only to fill the center role that you're missing, but also, like you said, is a presence and an aura. And that would, I think, really be beneficial for the Devils, not only for the players in that locker room, but for the fans to give them some hope and something to root for again, because it's been very tough for fans of the New Jersey Devils to see two of their players, be accused of something like that. It's no joke, and it's really hard for, I would say, an entire locker room when one of your brothers, if you've been on a team, you know what it's like to be teammates with someone, and for someone to, betray. I would say that's betrayal on everybody if that sort of thing it happens.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some morale to be boosted for the New Jersey Devils, and it's not fair to the other players in that locker room, and it's certainly not fair to the victim. We stand with her and hope she gets what she deserves. But with that said, there's still, you know, 35 games left, or in this National Hockey League season, something like that. And the Devils have a chance to cover ground, have a chance to make the playoffs. The Flyers are going down. They've lost 5 in a row. The Islanders have won 2 of their last 10. The Lightning have 3 games in hand, but they've been winning like crazy. The Red Wings are slipping. They're going to fall out of that wild card race sooner rather than later, you think. Do the New Jersey Devils make the playoffs, Chris? I think they're going to sneak in.
I'm gonna stick with what I said in mid-December. I don't think this is a playoff team. I think it's a year where they can just kind of rate themselves and kind of just look back. It's a real self-reflection year for this Devil team. And I think especially if this team doesn't make the playoffs this year, they're gonna be one of the wagons of the NHL next year. It just seems like if this season doesn't go well, the really next year is the all-in year. And if it doesn't work out, let's blow up the Prudential Center and let's do it all over again. And it feels like that is kind of the vibe. And I don't feel that kind of desperateness right now in this season. It still feels like they know what they have and they don't want to blow blow it all up right now. I think they're gonna have a bit of not complacency, but they're gonna be patient here a little bit, which I think is important. But I just don't see this Devil team, whether they make up the ground, make some moves, really go all in, like we're talking about being buyers. I just still can't see them making up all that ground and then sneaking in, and then no one around them really having a resurgence, no one around them really kicking it on. I just think it's unrealistic, and I don't think that's where Devil fans' expectations should be. I think Devil fans' expectations should be around getting really healthy right now. And then the goaltender situation, I think I would be worried about a lot. And just not only looking in the trade deadline, but also in the offseason, whether that's the draft or whether that is, meddling trades for prospects. I think just filling gaps and filling problems, I think, would be my first priority as a Devil fan, not necessarily making the playoffs, because I don't think I see a ton of success in the playoffs. Even if they make it there, teams traditionally with bad defenses and bad goalies don't usually do well in the playoffs. So I wouldn't be too worried about that right now. As Devil fan, I'd have my priority on just fixing the issues and fixing the holes that exist. And that would be the most productive way for them to really handle this back end of the season to me.
Yeah, well, with their injuries and with their issues in goal, I fear you may be right, Chris. Maybe it's just my bias clouding my judgment and my wishful thinking. Jack Hughes coming back, you never know what that guy can bring. So maybe I'm just waiting for him. But we're going to find out tomorrow night when the Devils host the Avalanche at the Prudential Center. Chris, man, thank you so much for doing this. Really wanted to get some
Of course.
bigger thoughts out about the Devils midway through the year. Hope you've been enjoying being a beat reporter thus far this season. Very well deserved. It's going to be more opportunities like that down the line for you. Obviously, why wouldn't there be? And yeah, we're going to keep our eye on whether or not they make moves at the deadline. What happens with Lindy Ruff? What happens with their injuries? What if they do with their cap space that they're going to have now that Dougie Hamilton's out long term? So, Chris, again, thank you for doing this, my man. Really
Of course.
appreciate this. Really love working with you and getting this stuff out. Yeah, so for WFUV Sports, this is Chris Carrino. I'm James Birle, your two Devils beat reporters. We will see you guys from the Prudential Center for the rest of this NHL season.